The year was 2379, and Earth was no longer blue. Smoke choked its atmosphere, oceans festered with fallout, and continents bore the scars of orbital fire. What began as a diplomatic overture to a newly encountered species, the HFY, became humanity's execution sentence. They didn't invade with malice. They acted with certainty, guided by the cold calculus that humanity, with its unpredictable nature and violent potential, was an unacceptable variable in a stable galaxy. First contact ended in fire. They dismantled the Martian colonies in days. Luna fell within a week. The orbital defense rings were erased in minutes. Humanity had prepared for threats, rogue AIs, environmental collapse, even internal war, but not this. The HFY were precise, sterile in their violence, not cruel, just efficient. Their machines cut power grids with atmospheric strikes. They ignited EMP waves that silenced entire continents. Cities went dark without warning. Food supply lines fractured. Satellites blinked out like dying stars. In 12 years, 9 billion lives were lost, not in a glorious stand, but in silence, through starvation, exposure, panic. Entire nations vanished from the map without a single ground battle. Galactic observers watched from a distance, unmoved. They had seen this before, a young species rising too fast, believing it could matter, then erased. Empires far older than Earth's history sent condolences but no aid. Tragic, they said. Unsurprising, others whispered. Earth, they agreed, would be a lesson. A reminder of the natural order. But humanity wasn't done. Deep beneath Iceland's crust, in vaults once built for seed storage and data preservation, came the first spark. In the ruins of old Nairobi, survivors scavenged solar arrays and powered emergency mesh networks. They couldn't rebuild the world, but they could speak to each other. Fragmented languages and static-ridden transmissions stitched together a desperate chorus. Not of surrender. Not of peace. But of resolve. What terrified the HFY wasn't the resistance itself. It was the refusal. Humans didn't accept extinction. They refused to vanish, refused to kneel. In the face of mathematical impossibility, they adapted. They rerouted medical AI to build prosthetic limbs from drone parts. They stripped down alien wreckage to create reactors from stolen fusion cores. And when all else failed, they used their minds. One team, trapped in the hollowed remains of the Andes array, repurposed its AI to broadcast quantum anomalies, scrambling HFY sensors with noise patterns based on human brainwaves. Another cell used weather control satellites meant for climate regulation to create synthetic lightning storms over HFY patrols. No pattern. No logic. Just chaos. And chaos, the HFY learned, could not be countered with precision. In the cold reaches of Siberia, families taught children to code before they could walk. Not out of luxury, but survival. Every keystroke mattered. Every command line could cripple a ship, reroute a drone, or steal nanoseconds from the HFY. And across continents, elders remembered, not history as dates, but the feeling of rebellion. Of fire in the chest and steel in the jaw. Underground, humanity wasn't rebuilding civilization. It was remaking itself. Not in the image of peace, but of resistance. Culture became weaponized. Music carried data. Poetry embedded ciphers. Even lullabies contained virus strings, sung by parents into the ears of children too young to understand, but destined to fight. To the galaxy, it was over. To Earth, it was war in slow motion. One not fought with fleets, but with scraps, code, and memory. A war not meant to be won conventionally, but survived long enough for one breakthrough. Humanity didn't seek revenge. It sought existence. That was enough. The HFY returned to wipe out the last major urban holdouts, only to find the cities empty. Instead, they faced ambushes and ruins, traps laid not with technology, but psychology, designed not to kill HFY, but to make them question their own certainty. That doubt, that human concept, began to take root. This wasn't about hope. Hope had burned with the atmosphere. This was about refusal. The refusal to die. The refusal to accept that logic outweighed spirit. The refusal to go quietly. And so, from the brink, a new kind of human was born, not biologically, but philosophically. Stripped of comfort, stripped of safety, stripped of everything but will. They weren't waiting for salvation. They were building a future the galaxy said couldn't exist. It began in silence. No parades, no rallying flags. Just scattered pockets of survivors who refused to lie down. The world above was ashes, but underground, in flooded subways, buried arcologies, and gutted research labs, the resistance started to breathe. Not with grand strategy, but with stubborn improvisation. Humanity had nothing, no fleets, no armies, no support. But it had people. And people, stripped to instinct and intellect, became dangerous. They called it Project Prometheus. Not a weapon. A framework. Built from scraps of alien tech, broken physics labs, and bleeding-edge theories written by minds who should have died but didn't. The mission was simple: repurpose, reprogram, and retaliate. The execution was chaos. Engineers embedded neural patterning into recovered HFY drones. Biologists redesigned viral proteins to hack bioscanners. Old-world coders fused language models with quantum processors to develop the first war AIs, entities not bound by programmed strategy, but by emergent intuition. These were not government projects. There was no government left. Every breakthrough came from someone on the edge: scientists in frozen bunkers running power from bicycle dynamos, teenagers in salvage rigs coding from memory, burned-out veterans injecting guerrilla tactics into training simulators. Each success came at cost. Every test cost lives. But it worked. The HFY had never fought an enemy that didn't follow its own rules. They expected linear retaliation. Instead, they faced asymmetry. A supply ship vanished into an asteroid belt, only for its crew to reappear on a hijacked HFY frigate. Patrol beacons went offline, replaced by AI loops that mimicked safe zones. HFY data cores were overwritten with simulated panic, collapsing their internal command structures. It wasn't one blow that turned the tide. It was 1,000 paper cuts, strategic, irregular, and unpredictable. And humanity didn't need to win. It only needed to not lose fast enough. In New Bangkok's underwater arcologies, cybernetic limbs were printed from industrial resin, and combat exosuits were assembled from agricultural meshes. One of them, known only as Seraph 9, infiltrated a HFY relay outpost and transmitted the Resistance's first system-wide beacon. It didn't call for help. It didn't beg. It said 2 words: "We remain." Stories followed, not fables but fact. A paralyzed coder in what remained of Nova Delhi hijacked a HFY reconnaissance drone using nothing but a soldered headset and recursive logic. The drone's feedback loop took out a carrier ship. She was 16. On Europa Station, 2 children known as the twins of dust modified mining drills into gravitic destabilizers. When the HFY landed to crush the sector, the twins brought down the ice shelf, burying the invaders under 4 kilometers of pressure. There was no single leader. No central base. Resistance was decentralized, nodes of intelligence and action linked by encrypted pulses, dark light comms, and the sheer will to coordinate. When HFY forces cornered one cell, another flanked them, not through numbers, but foresight. They learned faster than the HFY expected. They changed tactics every encounter. They weaponized unpredictability. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like humans. Illogical, emotional, irrational. And that made them untraceable. In a crater city outside Sao Paulo, survivors broadcast old Earth music layered with encoded schematics. Jazz and blues became codebooks. A melody could deliver firmware patches or weapon schematics. The HFY tried to decode it. They failed, because they didn't understand improvisation. They didn't understand soul. That was the advantage. Not firepower. Not speed. Identity. Every time a HFY vessel was sabotaged, the broadcast followed. We remain. Every time a new method of disruption emerged, it bore no signature. No face. Just action. precision wrapped in chaos. They adapted alien tools for their own hands. Tools not made for humans, reshaped by minds that didn't care about limits. Where the galaxy had rules, humanity built exceptions. And something changed. KRY-Lex patterns slowed. Analysis units hesitated. Projections failed. What was supposed to be a clean extermination became a drain. A war of attrition, on their side. For the first time in their history, their logic failed them. The resistance didn't offer terms. They didn't seek attention. They weren't fighting for approval. Every action, every advancement, every fallen comrade served one purpose: survival on their terms. Not as remnants. Not as relics. But as a species unwilling to go extinct. And from this storm of chaos and adaptation, the impossible began to feel inevitable. The shift came without ceremony. One moment, humanity was clawing for breath; the next, it was drawing blood. Not just surviving, but striking. The first decisive moment unfolded at what was once known as Lagrange Point 4. Later, it would be called the Battle of Broken Sky. 17 human vessels, half of them refitted mining hulks, executed a synchronized strike on a KRY-Lex flotilla of over 100 ships. They didn't win through firepower. They bent gravitational physics, used orbital debris as concealment, and triggered cascading failures across KRY-Lex AI using synthetic emotion signatures: panic, confusion, indecision. The KRY-Lex weren't programmed for that. They fractured. This wasn't chance. Human minds had studied their patterns, not to mirror them, but to interrupt them. Psychological sabotage became a battlefield tool. Disinformation spread through intercepted transmissions. Artificial emotional cues embedded into combat AIs forced KRY-Lex tacticians to process irrelevant data: empathy, fear, sacrifice, concepts that meant nothing to them, yet consumed their attention. These weren't just attacks. They were lessons. And the KRY-Lex were learning that they didn't understand their enemy at all. After Broken Sky, Earth's orbit was no longer theirs. Human forces reclaimed abandoned relay stations, hacked dormant satellites, and re-established interplanetary communication. It wasn't full control, but it was enough to coordinate resistance across the system. Operations became faster, deadlier. No longer isolated skirmishes, now they were campaigns. Short, brutal, and precise. In less than 3 years, over 40 KRY-Lex nodes were rendered useless. They started rerouting supply chains, reducing exposure, even abandoning certain sectors. It was their first retreat. That victory echoed far beyond Earth. Across the galaxy, species that had dismissed humanity as doomed began watching. Some with disbelief. Others with fear. Even those who once labeled humans a failed experiment began recalibrating their assessments. No species had ever reversed the KRY-Lex purge. None had forced them to adapt. Humanity didn't just resist, it broke the template. Defections followed. A few alien engineers, analysts, and philosophers abandoned their posts, not out of loyalty, but out of fascination. They saw in humans something absent in the orderly systems of galactic civilization, a volatility that produced innovation at a pace they couldn't replicate. The resistance accepted them cautiously. Not as saviors, but as tools. Contributions were measured by results, not sentiment. In the Martian dryduck ruins, a breakthrough occurred. A dormant drive core left from an early translite prototype was restored using a hybrid of human creativity and repurposed KRY-Lex components. For the first time since the invasion, a human vessel jumped between star systems under its own power. Not only had humanity defied extinction, they had reclaimed the stars. This leap marked the beginning of the Unbroken Accord. Not a return to the old world, but a redefinition of civilization. No borders. No flags. Just a singular priority: existence through unity. Survivors, engineers, tacticians, scholars, everyone contributed. The Accord wasn't a government. It was a pact. A refusal to splinter again. It codified every principle that had kept them alive: adaptability, decentralization, unpredictability, and unyielding resolve. Their communication doctrine changed. No longer secretive. They transmitted openly, defiantly. Messages were short. Clear. We are not finished. We are not fragments. We are the Unbroken. These signals weren't propaganda. They were declarations, aimed directly at the KRY-Lex. Designed to rattle logic with raw intent. Human strategy evolved beyond reaction. Now they set traps across asteroid belts, manipulated gravitational anomalies, triggered false positives on KRY-Lex scans, and even mimicked their own losses to bait overconfidence. Every move became a blade hidden in shadow. The KRY-Lex, built for certainty, were now drowning in misdirection. One by one, human victories stopped being anomalies. They became patterns. Resistance cells merged into coordinated fleets. Orbital factories were rebuilt in secret and powered by recycled cores. The resistance was no longer fighting to delay the end. It was preparing for dominance. And when the KRY-Lex attempted their next full-scale push into Earth's system, they found an ambush waiting. Not ragged survivors. Not desperation. But readiness. No speeches. No mercy. No retreat. Humanity had crossed the threshold. The war was no longer about not dying. It was about winning. The moment came when strategy met inevitability. Humanity, once fragmented and hunted, now operated as a single, adaptive force. The Unbroken Accord had turned Earth's ruins into launch points, not shelters. The fleet, no longer cobbled together, had become a fusion of design philosophies never meant to coexist, human ingenuity welded to alien precision, with chaos encoded into every system. They didn't mimic the galaxy's standards. They dismantled them and built something new. Strike operations reached deep into KRY-Lex-controlled territory. Not for territory or conquest, but to dismantle their infrastructure at the roots. Their communications relays were sabotaged using resonance-based virus loops that mimicked natural quantum interference, completely undetectable by conventional scans. Weapon platforms were compromised before activation, forced to overheat or misfire. By the time the KRY-Lex realized their networks were failing, they couldn't identify where the breach had begun. These weren't random attacks. They were calculated psychological maneuvers. KRY-Lex command hierarchies were constructed around absolute logic and efficiency. Humanity injected uncertainty at every level. Combat AI were forced into recursive loops by signals that defied standard parameters. Fleet formations unraveled due to phantom targets that didn't exist, false sensor data seeded across systems in advance. Entire units were wiped out responding to threats that had never been there. The fear wasn't in losing ships. It was in losing control. Humanity knew they couldn't match the KRY-Lex in raw power. So they refused to play by those rules. Instead, they turned their enemy's strength into a liability. A single human ship could now engage multiple KRY-Lex vessels not through superior firepower, but through induced doubt. When a KRY-Lex captain couldn't confirm a target's position, allegiance, or payload, the engagement delayed. Delay meant opportunity. Opportunity meant survival. And often, survival meant victory. Civilians had become tacticians. Technicians had become saboteurs. Every human-born child was trained not just in survival but in misdirection. Cultural knowledge became part of strategy. Ancient myths and symbols encoded data packets. Language drift was used to hide information in plain sight. Even memory was weaponized. KRY-Lex interrogation AIs were rendered inert by fabricated histories fed through captured human minds, bogging their analysis in layers of contradiction. The turning point arrived quietly. A KRY-Lex command node, deep in the Varn expanse, simply went silent. No distress call. No explosion. When a scout ship was sent to investigate, they found the facility intact, systems running, power stable, but empty. Not a single entity remained. Surveillance playback revealed nothing. One moment it operated normally. The next, gone. The only anomaly was a single human phrase etched into a wall of the central chamber in 22 languages. "We see you now." That message reverberated beyond the KRY-Lex. For the first time, Species across the galaxy began speaking humanity's name with caution instead of dismissal. Observers turned allies. Some offered technology, others intelligence, but most simply watched, trying to understand how a species that should have been erased had become a variable no one could model. The HFY launched a counter-campaign, Operation Purity. A blitz meant to burn through human systems in overwhelming waves, reasserting dominance through sheer volume. It failed. Not because humans met them ship for ship, but because they weren't there. Every target was already evacuated, mined, rigged to implode. Instead of battle, the HFY inherited chaos. Their ships were crippled in gravity wells seeded with interference nodes. Their tactics unraveled as human systems broadcast decoy orders in perfect HFY dialect. When they did find humans, they found coordinated response teams, strikes delivered in exacting silence. No wasted movement. No visible command structure. HFY intelligence collapsed trying to map a hierarchy that didn't exist. The humans had become everything the HFY weren't: unstructured, unpredictable, and unrelenting. And most importantly, unafraid. Fear had long faded. What remained was will. The drive to not just survive, but to matter. In their absence from the galactic order, humanity had not decayed. It had crystallized into something new. Something sharper. Not barbaric. Not ascended. Just undeniable. The war had become asymmetrical to the point of imbalance. But the imbalance now favored the humans. And for the first time, the HFY recognized it wasn't just a rebellion. It was an evolution. The final act wasn't marked by a grand offensive. There was no climactic battle, no singular moment of triumph. What unfolded was far more definitive. Irrelevant star. The HFY, once the arbiters of survival, began withdrawing, not by strategy, but necessity. Their projections no longer held. Their models, once flawless, now failed at scale. Human unpredictability had metastasized across the stars, infecting systems they had never even invaded. The logic that had once justified the purge could no longer explain the outcome. Entire HFY sectors went dark. Not destroyed. Abandoned. Human forces didn't chase them, they replaced them. Infrastructure reclaimed from war zones was transformed overnight into autonomous hubs of development. Terraformers began operating again. Not in service of old governments, but in alignment with the Accord's priority, resilience. Every city rebuilt served as both haven and armory, culture and command. Resources were allocated with surgical efficiency. There was no luxury, only necessity, and from necessity, strength. Humanity didn't declare victory. It declared presence. A constant, undeniable assertion that they would not vanish. When the HFY attempted diplomatic re-engagement through proxy channels, they were ignored. Not out of pride. Out of principle. Humanity would not bargain with those who sought its erasure. There would be no ceasefire, no treaties. Only distance. The galaxy watched and waited for the moment retaliation would be unleashed. It never came. Instead, the Unbroken Accord expanded. Not through conquest, but by invitation. Worlds once deemed lost returned signals. Colonies thought extinct responded with data packets, encrypted in protocols obsolete for decades. They hadn't survived by hiding, they had endured through reinvention. They brought back sciences that had diverged in isolation. Philosophies born from silence. Techniques refined in solitude. The result wasn't unity through sameness. It was strength through difference. A new doctrine emerged, one that spread without force or imposition. It wasn't about dominance. It was about relevance. In a galaxy that worshipped stability, humanity had shown that dynamism was not a flaw, but a form of power. Their systems weren't perfect. They were volatile, adaptable, and responsive. Their leadership wasn't centralized. It was networked. Consensus was forged by necessity, not hierarchy. Alien species that once feared contamination now sought dialogue. Not all were welcomed. Trust was not freely given, and never again would it be naive. But those who approached with intent to learn rather than lead were accepted, cautiously, conditionally. Humanity had become the cautionary tale that rewrote the rules. The HFY, now observers rather than arbiters, retreated to the edges of known space. Surveillance confirmed their shift in doctrine, from enforcement to isolation. No further purges were attempted. The lesson had been learned, not through extermination, but through the failure to execute it. Humanity hadn't just survived. It had made extinction expensive, unsustainable star. And yet, there was no celebration. No monuments. No holidays. What had been reclaimed wasn't peace. It was continuity. The right to persist, to change, to influence. Children born after the purge were taught not to hate the HFY, but to understand what they represented, a system built on certainty, undone by a species built on doubt. That understanding became the new cornerstone of Earth's legacy. The stars, once symbols of loss, became navigation points again. Not to flee, but to reach. Exploration resumed, not to escape, but to learn, to connect, and to challenge. Human ships now bore no national insignia. They bore the sigil of the Unbroken, a fractured circle, not mended, but reinforced at the fault lines. Humanity had not risen to become a galactic empire. It had no ambition to rule. Its only doctrine was endurance. And from that singular truth emerged a presence too complex to quantify. It wasn't power as the galaxy understood it. It was something older. Something purer. It was refusal made permanent. The galaxy would never be the same. Every species, every civilization now calculated with a new constant, humanity. Not an anomaly, but a force. One that had faced annihilation not with symmetry, but defiance. Not with parity, but with persistence. Humanity didn't ask for its place among the stars. It proved it could never be removed.